those questions out so that we can all hear the answers to those questions at the same time. That way we're all singing off the same song sheet. So again, thank you for your time, Mark. Next up, we're going to, whoop, I went one too many. Next up, we're going to hear from Jeremy Cobb and Connie Vest. Jeremy Cobb is with the Richmond District Construction Section. I believe he's an area construction engineer in Richmond District. And Connie Vest is with Mullins Markings. So we'll get a perspective on plastic inlaid markers from both VDOT and industry. So first, we're going to have up Jeremy Cobb, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Cobb, and today I will be talking about inlaid pavement markers for the 2020 season. So this was the first year that plastic inlaid pavement markers were installed. As expected with any new method, there were a few learning curves along the way. In this PowerPoint, I will show a few examples of some of the challenges and difficulties that we experienced. Planning. The success of the project starts in the beginning. For PIM installation, this really begins at the onset of paving operations. The main issue which needs to be addressed is the centerline joint. Discussions should be held with the paving contractor to determine the location of the centerline joint. Depending on the roadway type, the pavement marking type, method of work, etc., the centerline joint could be offset by 6 inches or more. This is critical as both pavement markings and PIMS have a requirement to be offset from the centerline joint. The spec at the bottom states that the groove shall be at least 2 inches from the pavement joint. There were instances where to avoid the joint, the groove and the PIM had to be offset from the center line of the other markers. This becomes an issue when every 2 or 3 grooves have to be offset on the other side of the joint. In essence, you will see the groove and PIM flip-flopping from one side of the joint to the other every so often. This is dependent on the straightness of the joint. This is not desirable from both a visual and a work product point. Some general feedback from the industry indicates that the centerline joint is still a significant issue when PIMS get installed. As stated earlier, having discussions or pre-activity meetings prior to beginning work to help explain requirements, expectations, prosecution of work, etc., greatly helps and can diminish these issues. These meetings can be had at any time during the course of the project and is strongly encouraged by the department. The placement of the temporary pavement marking has also been an issue. Having the correct location in regards to the centerline and joint, how linear they are, and the dimensions per specifications have a great impact on the installation of PIMS. If these are incorrect, the PIMS will coincidentally be incorrect also. This needs to be stressed to all parties and discussed in the pre-activity meetings as well. Epoxy. There were some challenges with the amount of epoxy placed for each PIM. Per spec, the marker is to be completely surrounded in epoxy, with the epoxy level with the edge of the holder. There were instances where there was too much epoxy, which caused the lens to be covered, thus rendering the marker useless. Examples can be seen in the photos of this slide. The reflective marker at these locations were covered with epoxy. Now, on the opposite side, there were also cases where too little epoxy was utilized. Per manufacturer specifications, the teeth on these markers need to be fully covered. With too little epoxy, these markers have a greater chance of working loose over the years. In these cases, additional epoxy should have been added to the proper level while it was wet. the installer needs to become attuned to the amount of epoxy needed for proper installation and verify after marker placement. Sealant grooves for PIMS. Unlike plant mix projects, for overlay projects, there was a requirement for sealant grooves. This operation probably gave us the greatest number of issues for PIMS this year. The main issues, which in a sense are all intertwined, were protecting the actual PIM, overspray and excess of emulsion, and tracking. I've included a portion of the spec in this slide detailing the requirements. Please note the application rate of 0.1 gallons per square yard. This will be important in future pictures. Protecting the PIM. Per spec, the marker is to be covered and protected during the sealant operation. This method is unspecified and left to the contractor. There are various ways this can be done. One contractor created a small metal box on a chain to protect the marker, as shown in some of these photos. Another created a similar wooden box on a stick to cover the marker during emulsion application. The biggest takeaway is to make sure this method of protection works. The center photo shows an example where the emulsion got on the lens. This lens now needs to be cleaned or replaced. Attention needs to be given to the covering to ensure that it is clean and minimizes any transfer of emulsion, or that it adequately protects the lenses during the operation. Sealing of PIM, overspray and excess. Another learning curve during this year's schedule for sealing the PIMS is the amount of overspray and excess amount of emulsion used for each groove. Again, the specifications do not state how sealing of the grooves will be accomplished. Early in the season, attempts were made applying the emulsion with a distributor truck. In the photos, you can see this operation and some of the results. This method produced a significant amount of overspray as well as an excess amount of emulsion being used. This led to pulling, tracking, covering of pavement markings, and since the marker is at the lowest point of the groove, it led to multiple instances where the marker lens was covered in tack. The distributor method was abandoned and hand wands were utilized for the vast majority of sealant operations. This produced more favorable results. However, care is still needed. Remember the earlier spec? It stated 0.1 gallons per square yard application rate. For the standard groove, this equates to about a half cup of emulsion. You can clearly see more was utilized for these operations. The focus should be a clean, even application. The spec does not list an acceptable amount of overspray, but should be limited and/or minimized. Tracking. A side effect of the amount of overspray of emulsion is tracking. Tracking, once the grooves were sealed, was a big issue on multiple jobs. This can be done by both construction vehicles and traffic. This is another reason why sealing needs to be closely monitored. As you can see in the photos, due to excess, there's significant tracking which occurred for the majority of this operation. Another issue, which unfortunately I do not have a picture on, is the actual groove itself. There is a set spec on the dimension of the groove, with little to no variance. There were some issues noted, mostly on overlay and treatment projects, where due to the overlap of treatment, pavement marking, or even the aggregate dimension, the machine had difficulty fully engaging to form a square end to the groove. This would often be tapered looking or wedge shaped. At the onset of the operation or during pre-activity meetings, the capability and limitations of the equipment need to be discussed with an understanding reached. Not all instances will a squared off groove be achievable. Now, not all work was bad. We've had good success also. The key is to plan and constantly monitor the work. This is not an operation that we can set up and run continually. Any issues need to be identified quickly and early by the contractor and project inspector. If an issue is noted, stop and adjust work. Do not continue with a process which leads to unacceptable work. Adjustments in work and procedures are much easier to do than corrective work. Constant communication on how work is progressing needs to be had between all parties. With pre-activity meetings being held and constant communication between all parties, there should be minimum issues with achieving a product that is within specification and is acceptable to everyone. Now, this ends the presentation. Now, thank you for listening and allowing me to present on this topic.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. That was very informative. Had a lot of great examples of work that was done this past year. And as we move forward to this year with these plastic inlaid markers, that continued cooperation between both VDOT and the industry obviously is critical. Our next speaker up is Connie Vest. Connie's with Mullins Markings, and she's going to give us the contractor's perspective for the PIMS installation from 2020.
Hey, good day, everyone. This is Connie Vest with Mullins Markings. We're very pleased to be hosting this presentation today for the 2021 Asphalt Seminar. As Jeremy Cobb concluded, many lessons were learned in 2020 and really many for the good. On a few positive notes, all did go better than anticipated in 2020, given the new grooving technique and marker installation. Project team resolution was extremely great where needed, and we were grateful of that cooperation. In 2021, our aim is for a much smoother operation and taking into consideration the minor hurdles that we did encounter in 2020. Bringing to light a few common knowns which everyone involved in projects requiring the newly installed PIMS during 2020 are likely aware of some imperfect scenarios to a grooving operation. Just to reiterate, and hopefully not conveying anything new, these groove and marker installation challenges for us last year were the longitudinal joint locations, often being a contender to achieving a perfect groove. Permanent pavement marking, such as thermoplastic, being a minimum of 90 mils thick, also being a contender. Both can present depth fluctuation and imperfect taper groove outcome. Helpful resolutions: early identification of these conflicts in the field prior to mobilizing and operating. GC and sub, identifying these questionable locations and resolving prior to operations. And VDOT and contractor pre-activity throughout. Just by demonstration, these are two examples of groove challenges relevant to a longitudinal joint. These locations are along a gore area. And as I spoke in the previous slide, you can see the imperfect or the less than desired taper outcome. Continuing subject to the previous two slides, and by way of circumstantial results, these are just a few more examples of what may pose undesirable outcome. This top photo is a gore location onto a ramp. By proximity, the approximately 1/2 inch high joint combined with a downward slope may have resulted in taper and overall groove inconsistency. The bottom left and right photos, this location is at a thermoplastic turn lane line, which could have posed interference, resulting in an inconsistent taper result, as you can see. So as demonstrated, there are many factors which can be considered and lend to instability to a marker grooving operation. No pun intended, but this is our point of view of a contractor's wish list. Decisive groove sealing parameters statewide. The parameters demonstrate an unclear need based on project type and location, referring to the inlaid pavement marker groove. So having these more well defined per each district would prove highly beneficial. Groove tolerance is outlined in the specifications. To our knowledge, the tolerances for the inlaid pavement marker groove are not inclusive to the current road and bridge specifications, nor the special provisions, and any subsequent data actually that we have been able to locate. Resolving the measurable unknowns. With many measurable unknowns, it is vital to uphold and maintain project relations and leveled communication for the benefit of a sure end result. Unlike many subcontractors, we as pavement marking installers, as well as the pavement marker installation, are amongst few that do indeed dabble in each district. So having a method to identify expectations geographically, even pre-bid, would be beneficial in heading off the whys, the hows, and the wheres in the field and promoting efficient pre-planning. Our 2021 operations will hopefully continue with a pattern of success and a vision of certainty to team mark some of the 2020 challenges. Mullins Markings hopes to continue in 2021, working with project teams and the department to lessen challenges and gain the best result possible. Have a great afternoon, and we do look forward to a successful season. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Connie. Again, I want to thank both you and Jeremy for your presentations today, because plastic inlaid markers, obviously something brand new, something that came on the industry very rapidly, and I believe we've all adapted very quickly. And at the end of the day, we've produced some really successful work. You've pointed out some really great things, the lessons learned from 2020 as we move into 2021. We've got a number of questions coming in, so please remember to take this time as you're thinking about them to bring out those questions so that we can have our Q&A session just before lunch. This will be your opportunity. We're going into the season this coming year, so make sure you have those questions ready. You have the folks that are on the panel. Most of the folks that are actually presenting today are on the panel and ready to answer those questions when we get there. So thanks again, guys.